like freedom of press in Pakistan. Basically, this is the main theme when I designed the course media system in Pakistan, because even if you decide to go into professional journalism or not, uh, as Chomsky said, understanding media is one of the most important functions of modern day citizens in the world. Like it's a global requirement to understand media, more so in the age of fake news and uh, alternative truth. We see alternative news and fake truth, fake news and alternative truths every day in Pakistan. Since the beginning till date, it's just happening like that. But you might have seen one of the biggest uh, demonstration of the influence of alternative truth uh, last week. I think it happened last week in the US. Have you witnessed that? Have you seen that? Have you seen the news about that? What happened over there?
No, sir.
That was President Trump doing. Uh, that was the day when the Senate was confirming Joe Biden's presidency after uh, counting the votes and results, everything. And President Trump decided to. He gave a call to everybody, his followers, to come to DC, and then he made a speech which can easily be. It's hate speech, and it's also incitement to offenses. And he now the Democrats have launched an impeachment uh, against him on on Monday, and they also called the vice president, called upon the vice president to uh, act upon the 25th amendment. 25th amendment means that the president is not fit to serve. It's better than impeachment because after the impeachment, he won't get a pension, he won't get security. Kind of U.S. presidents get $1 million pension per year, security, and all the stuff that our people also get. Uh, but the main thing was that he gave, although he couldn't prove anything in the court, and that decision was being implemented in the Senate. He called upon people, told them the good old story of stolen elections, and then asked them to go to march to the White or to the Senate. They went, and they just did a lot of damage. But we can see that it's very important to understand what is freedom of expression, what are government press relations, and how does all the system work. So for that purpose, I think one of the main purposes of the course is not to simply to give you an idea of how the media works as journalists, but it's also important to understand it as citizens. Like it's part of your understanding of the life that you are going to live or you are living, that where do you live basically, like how free are you. Many people think, and it's quite a debatable thing. The idea of freedom is 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 not it's a fluid idea for some people who can't make both ends meet. uh, just the freedom to have a meal is more than enough, which is fair enough. And for some people, kind of environmental degradation in a far-flung area in the world, which is thousands of miles away from them, uh, talking about it and intervening into that becomes part of their freedom. So their freedom has a very uh, broad area to cover. But there are certain issues which were somehow decided. That's why the UN is there, basically. The UN's job is basically to develop universal yardsticks for everything. And that's why I have uh, given this link to uh, United Nations High Commission for, I forget the name. It's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's very important. It's not big. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights only has 30 points. So I would advise you to read them through because it's very important. In our modern world, the post-UN world or the post-Second World War world, it's very important to adhere to UN guidelines. Why? Because the UN constitutes kind of a world gathering where people sit together and representatives of every part of the world sit together and decide about things. And these are the most authentic of all. There are certain treaties that are still controversial, like the UN Environment Treaty, Non-Proliferation, and many others, where some people sign, some don't, and things like that. Signatories are considered to be more civilized. The non-signatories are considered to be less or not civilized. Things like that. So what we'll discuss today is basically uh, what are the guidelines by the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and how do we fare? Like, instead of going into this debate, which is very subjective, talking about this is what the government is doing, this is what the government is not doing, journalists are good, journalists are bad, journalism is important, journalism is not important. The essential debate, a practical debate, is just to start with the UN and see where we stand right now. Uh, and also, this will also save you the trouble of going after certain NGOs who gives you a rating, kind of Pakistan rates top in corruption, and the next year Pakistan rates top in something good and things like that. So these are kind of think tanks who try to mold world opinion and also to pressurize different countries and institutions to toe different agendas. So the UN is safe, although there is a lot of controversy, but you shouldn't heed to that. So what is freedom of press basically? The dictionary definition I have given it: the right of newspapers, magazines, etc., to report news without being controlled by the government. Like, that's a free press. It's a simple and easiest definition. Like, no direct control by the government. Like, the government doesn't own you. The government can't force you into not doing or doing something. This again is a subjective issue. And here the UN gives the UN Article 19 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights gives you uh, a detail about that. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Now, the rest of, like, this Article 19 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights basically gives you, it encapsulates individual and media freedoms. Like, it's the individual's right to express themselves, and at the same time the individual has the right to access to information. We'll discuss it a bit later, but here it is. Like, you can individuals are within the right to seek information and also to impart information regardless of their national frontiers. Like, this is true for today, where you get information on social media and then share it further. uh, like, you can get information from any part of the world and you can share it. And so that's kind of a very open environment. But then we read Article 19 of the Pakistani Constitution, and it says that every citizen shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression, and there shall be press freedom subject to any reasonable restriction. That's where it differs. Imposed by law in the interest of the glory of Islam, or the integrity or security or defense of Pakistan or any part thereof, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, commission of or incitement to an offense. Now, there are too many limitations on the right to freedom here. freedom of expression and free media. Now, some people say that these are important. Uh, I agree and disagree. Like these laws are already present in other forms. Putting it into Article 19 means that you make Article 19 basically irrelevant because libel defamation is there. This clause about Islam is also part of the objective revolution inserted in 1956. So it's all there. Why to recite it again over here? Because here the Article 19 becomes kind of irrelevant because it doesn't offer those freedoms. Now, it is a very debatable point, but my point simply is that these restrictions are already there in other parts of the Constitution. So you don't need to club them together with the Article 19, which ensures freedom of speech. Then there is this idea of freedom of speech and expression and freedom of press. Especially now, I put this in because right now this is happening. Individual journalists or people who are in the media or whosoever publishes mix their personal opinions with uh, with news and information that is published in the media. And this makes it somehow very difficult and tricky for them because you have to understand the difference between freedom of speech and expression and the freedom of journalism. Like freedom of speech is an individual right. You have the right to speak and think the way you wish to. Uh, but when you decide to publicize it through a mass medium, that's different. That's journalism. So journalism has those restrictions. You know what journalism is basically, because journalism doesn't simply mean gossip columns at home. It means that you have to have authentic information, uh, all these news values that, do you know about news values? Anybody? Did you study reporting? It's a 300 class. Right. So I got a message. So here it is. Yes, excellent. So these are the news values. News values basically differentiate between your own opinions and news. So when you tweet something where there is a news item and you write on top of it your own opinion and you think that it's one thing, it's not, because your opinion is your opinion. And when you take the same tweet, somebody else, and makes it news because somebody has tweeted it, again, the news doesn't remain authentic. Then there is journalism is an institution, as I say. It's not about simply whatever you say at home, you can just get it published. That's wrong. Especially if you see it in television, everybody saying whatever, especially these celebrity anchors, they are just unbridled. They just, whatever comes to them, they just throw it to the people on the mass medium. And when you ask them why did they do it, they say, oh, this is kind of victimization and stuff like that. True, some of it is, but most of the time you have just crossed the red line because you have mixed individual personal opinion and bias with facts on a mass medium, and you don't have the right to do that. It's again somehow the freedom of assembly, basically. The freedom of assembly means that you have individual opinion, and then you come out and discuss it with other colleagues, like people. Like if you talk about certain issues in the class, you talk about certain issues in your canteen or at a playground or wherever you decide to sit and talk about something, that's your right, basically. But if you look at the format uh, of TV talk shows, they just think that they are but they are kind of using their right to freedom of assembly. No, it's not your right to freedom of assembly, because the right to freedom of assembly is not institutional. Basically, institutional in the sense that that right, you assemble together and talk to each other amongst friends. You just don't throw it to the larger public outside. So there is the difference, and that's where many of the things become very confused, and it's also very misleading for the audience, because they think that they are talking about, because you put facts in front and then you start to discuss it, uh, putting forward issues that have no relevance with facts. And these are your personal biases. Like you might have seen it every day, people throwing accusations about about individuals' personal lives, things of the sort. Some became very popular. Some are ministers now. But you see them. They are on Twitter. They are saying whatever they wish, and then you ask them to come to television. They'll do the same. They will just attack people directly, refer to their tweets, stuff like that. That's wrong. That's bad journalism. That's not journalism at all. So, but there is a connection: freedom of press and freedom of expression. You can't separate them. You can't say that whatever we say in private has no right to get public. There is. So here we go to the UN definition of freedom of speech and expression. Like, why do we have those? Like, these are indispensable conditions for the full development of the person, unquote. And then, quote, essential for any society. And again, a foundation stone for every free and democratic society. Like, it's very important that you have that freedom of expression, political discourse, commentary on one's own and on public affairs, canvassing discussion on human rights, journalism, cultural and artistic expression, teaching and religious discourse. Like, that's it. Like, it's all very important that freedom to discuss and freedom to think go together. But how are these connected with journalism? Article 19A of the Pakistani Constitution, which is the right to information. Every citizen shall have the right to have access to information in all matters of public importance, subject to regulation and reasonable restrictions imposed by law. Like, how would you get authentic information? If you are a citizen and you have right to access to information, the biggest vehicle of information is basically the media. So if you don't allow the media to function properly, you are infringing upon article the human constitutional rights, kind of article 19A, because you are hindering people to get uh, their right to, I forget the word, but it's okay, hindering people from access to their right to get authentic information. If you close that door, then rumors will abound, and then people won't know what's right and wrong. Exactly what we are having right now in Pakistan, an information anarchy, basically, because there is no information. Every day you have many instances where you don't know what the truth is, and then you start speculating. Then there are fake news. Then there are alternative truths, and they come into play, especially on social media. Without freedom of journalism, it is not possible to have a free society. That's very true. This is the kind of the fourth pillar of a state. Media and journalism is as important as is legislature, executive, and the parliament, like, uh, and judiciary. So if you don't have it, you don't have any societal checks and balances on the use and abuse of power. And then we have this other theme, which is about controlled media in Pakistan. It's really interesting. Uh, Pakistan made a review on the press on the commission's recommendations, which ensures free speech and um asks nations of the world to abide by it and ensure that there is free media. I have shared that link with you. You can read it. It's not too long. It's again a one pager, a very simply written one. The reason why it's given to have public sector, government owned television is really interesting. It's the same reason that Naeem Bukhari recently gave, because he's a lawyer. And he was then asked these questions regarding why did he say that the opposition the opposition won't have any right on PTV. And he was asked this question uh, during the Senate committees on television or broadcasting, I don't remember, but especially uh, Nafisa Shah from Sindh, BPP Sindh, she was very critical of him. and he responded. He just dodged the question in his own humorous ways. But there was his point, which coincides with what the government of Pakistan had to say in the review. And they say that this is a free media environment where everything is just there, but there are certain issues which are not given proper coverage, like health uh, and other information like communication. And there are many. If you read that, health is considered to be the prime one because health is not covered properly in the private media. Naeem Bukhari took the same point and he responded in the Senate in front of the committee. I think it was I don't know whether it's the Senate or the National Assembly's committee, but it was the committee. And he said, since there are a lot of other avenues where you can get the perspective of the opposition or all other political stakeholders. Government has to use it's a very lame excuse, by the way, but government has to use public funds to ensure that people get free and balanced information. So, if you wish to come to PTV for an interview, uh, you have to face critical questions. And then he announced that he'll be hosting 3 shows on television. Personally, he's a very good TV show host. He did it in PTV in the 80s, and I think a very good show. And he said that he will invite all ministers, federal ministers, and ministers of state, and ask them straight questions and critical questions. If the opposition is interested in having such a day, they can join, which they won't, I'm sure, because then it will be difficult. I'm not sure, well, the ministers will get the same treatment as the opposition. But that's the point. The point here is that the government justifies holding private television and radio, which is against the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, right to information, where it says that media shouldn't be controlled by the government. Here, there is a media which is being paid uh, by uh, by the government, like supported by the government, has a terrestrial reach of more than 80% of Pakistan, whereas cable television doesn't have that reach. And you pay only 25 or 45 or 50 rupees in your electricity bill to get that medium. And it's also 24/7 now. It's like PTV Sports, for example, is really controlling all international sports. Uh, Private television can't compete because they don't have the same amount of money, because they don't have the same amount of stability. They might be better in other areas, but in sports, it's simply not possible uh, to compete with the government. So that's the reason why the government thinks that they have the right to have government controlled media, but it directly clashes with the Article 19 of the Declaration of Human Rights. But that's how it is. That's how the government looks at it. And the other thing is basically the government has monopoly over information, basically uh, because the for the same reason, because the Article 19 of the Pakistani Constitution is different from the UN Declaration of Human Rights. It limits freedoms and it has the right to not to give you certain information. Like it limits it in many ways, like almost 6, 7 conditions, which are very subjective and which can be defined in any way. Like you can just let anybody go, say no, he or she didn't uh, violate any of these conditions, or you can just get somebody arrested and jailed by saying yes he did, and who will define that? And then it goes to the court, and then it just goes on and on. And if people would write, I would like to avoid it, basically. I wouldn't like to get into that trouble if I don't have many extremely high stakes involved and I'm into the game of politics. So only politicians can afford getting into conflict with these conditions. Other people can't, because common citizens don't have that much time and resources to fight all the way. So this is basically limiting. And this is why government has monopoly of information. Monopoly of information also means monopoly of the discourse. We'll discuss it later, basically. It's important that we understand because it's a continuous theme. I'm just laying the basic conditions for discussion in the weeks to come. And then when you see at government press relations, like you see this uh, scuffle between the media and the government right now. So government is powerful because it controls the advertising. Government advertising is one of the biggest sources of revenue for media in a country whose industrial base is very weak. It's getting better, but it's not that much. I have discussions with people who are into industry, and I tell them, you have kind of a huge kind of networks, and why don't you hire public relations professionals? They say, why should we do that? Because we need lawyers. We don't need public relations professionals. Once you are off the market, you can't do anything. You can only be influential if you are in the market. So if we are in the market, we use that money to have kind of leverage somewhere instead of just spending it on media professionals. And then political power, basically government is the all powerful because the prime minister is the chief executive of the country. You know, he wields all the uh, power strings in the country. That's why everybody wants to be the prime minister of Pakistan. Pressures on the media, direct, indirect, and social conditions, literacy, education, and urban focus. We'll discuss it later. We are running out of time. I don't want to just work through, but these will be the basis of our next lecture.